So if you have a judgment against a third party or been a victim of a Ponzi scheme or online fraud, a lot of times the fear is that you won't be able to collect your money because the debt or the fraudster is trying to hide assets, which may be the case. However, there's often opportunities for you to collect money from third parties that have money, that are banks, that are government agencies, that are other professionals that have insurance. And how do you do that? We've talked about this in other videos where there's third-party liability that's possible. And part of a very powerful fraud investigation is to look for possible third-party liability where somebody else can pay the bill. So here's an example of a major fraud scheme. It stole $10 million from investors. And this was something that the government prosecuted. The SEC went after this fraudster who was in California, who basically put together a Ponzi scheme and just took a bunch of money from people and came up with a fake company called Professional Investors and stole money. But all the money wasn't available to pay back to investors from the fraudster. So how did they do it? Well, what they did was they looked at third parties. And in this case, the third party was a bank. Umpqua Bank was accused of aiding a massive Ponzi scheme again. And how does this work? We saw this before. You've seen our other videos about the Scott Rothstein fraud case in Florida where TD Bank had to pay back investors. This is the same thing. This bank, Umpqua Bank, has been accused of aiding and abetting the Ponzi scheme that cost investors millions. And the bank, one of the largest in the Northwest, has been sued that the bank is liable because they were aware of the Ponzi scheme and enabled it by moving money from investors to the personal account. So this is the legal theory that a very good fraud investigator or your attorney will put together. It's called enabling or extending the fraud. If the bank, even unknowingly, help that fraud get bigger or last longer, they might have liability, right? In the Scott Rothstein case, TD Bank, all they did was they let the fraudster get away with not signing some paperwork. It's an administrative error that cost them money. In this case, what's claimed is a bank employee called the scammer, Casey, to alert him that an attorney was calling the bank to complain. And that employee may not have been in on the fraud, been in on the scam, but by doing that oversight, it helped the fraudster, Casey, enable and extend the fraud. If that bank employee said, hey, wait a minute, what's going on here? I'm getting these complaints about this fraud. Let me look into this. And they would see these wire transfers taking the money from the victims, putting them in the personal account. Maybe that scam would have been shut down earlier, and all the fraud that happened after that wouldn't have happened, right? The other thing is, this person was a prior convict. In 1997, was sentenced to prison. The bank still did business with this person, so they didn't perform their due diligence on the person, right? It's also not the first time. In 2014, the bank helped cover up a Ponzi scheme for an insurance company that lost $40 million, right? And there was one before that. Summit Accommodations collapsed in a similar scandal. Here's what happens. When a bank is looking to grow and build business, when they have a depositor that's putting lots of money in the bank, doing loans, doing lines of credit, they look at it like it's an opportunity for them to grow. So sometimes they're a little less stringent on the rules. They let the fraudsters get away with maybe not filling out the right paperwork. It doesn't mean necessarily that the bank was in on the fraud. They were trying to help to scam, but they're lax with their rules. When they do that, many times they become liable for losses because they help the fraud get bigger. They help the fraud last longer. So if you are a victim of a scam, of a fraud, make sure that your investigation that you do looks for third parties. It could be banks. It could be accountants, it could be attorneys, it could be sales companies. There are many other third parties that could help pay back your losses. In fact, many times these third parties are easier to get the money from because they're not going to fight back. The scammer is out to take your money and keep it. And they don't want to give you money back. The bank doesn't want to be involved with anything illegal or anything that's sketchy. So when they're confronted with something they did wrong, sometimes they'll just voluntarily pay to make the problem go away. Or they might have an insurance policy, and their liability insurance will say, look, let's not get involved with this. Let's just pay out the claim, right? Professional liability insurance, errors and omissions insurance. Every type of professional financial organization has an insurance policy that covers their business for losses. And many times, once there is a claim made to that insurance policy, the agent or the underwriter is going to say, look, don't mess around with this. Don't get dragged down in this. We don't want to pay legal fees. Just pay it. Settle. Make it go away. So look for the third parties. In many cases, it's easier than trying to navigate and find the hidden assets of the scammer. It's easier than trying to collect assets when the scammer is moving money around, maybe offshore accounts. Umpqua Bank is not going anywhere. If you have a claim against them, they're going to pay you your money voluntarily, or the insurance company, or the accountant, or the attorney. It's happened many times. This is a perfectly good example. This is a very recent case. You know, this story of the lawsuit is from right now. This video is being recorded on this day, February 17th, right? By the time you watch it, it might be a little later, but this is a current case. This type of recovery has been going on for 10, 15 years. Many attorneys don't even know to do this. Not their fault, not that they're bad attorneys. It's just a legal theory, legal strategy that many times is overlooked. We've been doing this going back more than 15 years. One good example is look at that Scott Rothstein case in Florida. The victims in that case collected 100% of their losses. It wasn't pennies on the dollar. They got back all their money, including all the expenses it took to get the money, the legal fees, investigative fees, all the other costs involved to get back the money were paid back 100% in full. It's very rare with a scam fraud case to have all the investors be made whole. It can happen when you look at third-party liability. Look, the scammer probably spent some of the money. They may have bought a house and a Ferrari, and those things can be sold and maybe get some of the money back. But a lot of the money that was stolen from investors or victims goes to vacations and going out to eat and things that are diminished assets or consumable assets. You're not going to get all that money back. Third-party liability is a great way to do it. Insurance policies are in existence to cover this. Sometimes there's government agencies that have victims restitution funds in certain industries. If there's a car dealership involved, car dealerships all pay into a fund that pay back victims restitution. So a good investigation is going to cast a wide net to find any of these third-party liabilities so that you as a victim has the highest probability of getting as much money back as possible.